You're about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
Welcome back to another live stream of Warrior Creed with me, your regular, the radical Maajid Nawaz, and my brother, as always, the infamous Usman Raja. And today, as you will see from the meme on the Rumble page, we are on this particular topic. Who's to blame for the violence in the Middle East, Israel or Hamas, the deep state? Now, the reason that's the meme for the show is you'll see from the title of the show what we're about to discuss. The Gaza border CCTV footage. Osman, you may have caught this. The footage, the video footage of the attack on October the 7th has been Epsteined. What I mean by that is just like the apparent alleged suicide of the man Epstein himself in prison, the CCTV footage for his suicide from one of the most top security prisons in the country mysteriously went missing. Well, now the CCTV footage on the Gaza border has conveniently for Netanyahu, considering the allegations we've been making on this show and many others, not just us, considering those allegations that Netanyahu facilitated this attack because he wanted to use it as a pretext to do what he was intending to do anyway, and that was to take all of Gaza, force the Gazan Palestinian population into the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, then take over the West Bank and have his one-state solution from the river to the sea, which is the formal constitutional policy of the Likud party, as we demonstrated already on a previous live stream of Warrior Creed, and as is already in terms of receipts provided to everybody for free on Radical Media, maajidnawaz.substack.com. So that's the allegation we have been making, and many others. It's an incredibly serious allegation. Well, you'd think that to refute that would be easy. Release to the world the CCTV footage from the Gaza border with Israel and the footage of the attack on October the 7th. But instead, that footage has gone missing. And that's why we were talking about this particular topic today with that meme. And of course, the title of the show, Gaza border CCTV, goes missing, as the media admits that Israel knew of the Hamas attack a year ago. So that's the conversation. That's the topic. And we're going to substantiate everything we've said just now, as usual, by providing receipts. And then, of course, having Usman, your reflections and an expert social and psychological commentary off the back of what we're presenting as well. But to first start and kick this off, the allegation that we made from the get-go, if you remember, when this attack happened, the very first live stream after October the 7th, the very first Radical Media article after October the 7th, was preceded by the social media post that we made almost immediately about this attack because of the shadow knows. And we put up, if you recall, Usman, you'll remember this, footage of a live stream by a former Israeli military intelligence, and her name was Efat Fenixon, and she said that this looks like that a stand-down order was given, and it looks like an inside job. And she was, of course, former IDF military intelligence. And, of course, since then, we've been leveling the allegation that Netanyahu was complicit in setting this entire thing up as a false flag. That's a very serious allegation. But, of course, as usual, mainstream media used to be the case that it was 3 years behind us. So if you remember, Osman, with COVID, it was 3 years behind us. With the climate scam, it kind of 2 years behind us. With Ukraine, it was about a year behind us. But now the gap between independent media voices making very serious allegations and being called conspiracy theorists for them, and mainstream, or more appropriately called corporatist media, then reporting on those stories, the gap has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So after last week's live stream, I was pleasantly surprised to find this. The New York Bloody Times Look at that headline. Israel knew Hamas's attack plan more than a year ago. A blueprint reviewed by the Times, the New York Times that is, laid out the attack in detail. Israeli officials dismissed it as aspirational and ignored specific warnings. Now, that New York Times article must be read in combination with when we made the claim in Radical Media. We made the very specific allegation that Netanyahu himself was facilitating this because he believed it was a way of dividing and conquering the Palestinians so that they couldn't get a Palestinian state. So it's not just the case, as this headline indicates, that Israel knew, but then didn't do anything about this attack because of negligence. It's not just the case, because there are on the record comments of Netanyahu stating specifically and explicitly that he believes that Hamas would be an asset to be used against the Palestinian Authority led by Fatah, so as to divide the Palestinians, prevent the potential arising of a Palestinian state. That is why the Times of London reported, and we keep bringing you back to this article. It's incredibly important. It's why this article from the Times of London, dated the 14th of October, a week after the attack, states, and I'll quote from it, another poll found that 94% of Israelis believed that the government was to blame for the war. Why do 94% of the population of the very country that came under attack blame their own government? 94% is no small figure. The reason 94% blame Netanyahu and his government for the October the 7th attack, we put to you, is that the Israeli public were onto this before the rest of the world, because prior to the October the 7th attack, Israel had been witnessing its most widespread protests against the Netanyahu administration, or for that matter, against any of its governments in its entire history. The Israeli population were out on their streets en masse, demanding Netanyahu's resignation. The only thing that saved him, conveniently, sarcasm, was this war. It's why it suits Netanyahu to stay locked into this war for as long as possible, because it's now been revealed that the trial dates, yes, he was on trial, the trial dates for Netanyahu's corruption allegations have been indefinitely postponed due to this war. Now, we saw that happen before with Zelensky in Ukraine, shutting down media opposition, banning opposition parties, all under the pretext of the war. So it's a blueprint that, of course, we know happens in war, where somebody that wants to cynically use war to prolong and sustain their power will behave in this manner. It isn't that strange if you think about it, but of course, because of the topic, because of who we're discussing, which is Israel and Netanyahu, and because of their influence, it becomes difficult to have these conversations. But it should be very clear by now that just like 94% of the Israeli public, and if you go to Radical Media, maajidnawaz.substack.com, that's the URL, maajidnawaz.substack.com. Go to the article there that Netanyahu facilitated Hamas receipts, and you'll see all the evidence with the quotes by Netanyahu saying why he believes Hamas was an asset. So now read that New York Times headline in that context. Israel knew Hamas attack plan more than a year ago, and then blame the fact that that was allowed to happen on Netanyahu, just like 94% of the Israeli public do. But it doesn't stop there, Osman. This week's news brought many such revelations, and here's the next one. The Jerusalem Post, no less than an Israeli newspaper, not even a left-wing one like the Haaretz. The Jerusalem Post is not a left-wing newspaper in Israel, but this Israeli newspaper, the Jerusalem Post, reports this. And that is that the IDF surveillance videos from Hamas's attack on October the 7th have gone missing. I'll read the subheading. This is dated December the 3rd, 2023 by Amir, if I can pronounce that correctly, Botwala, right, in Jerusalem Post staff. That's an Indian name. I don't know how that's interesting. But anyway, this is a Jerusalem Post article, and the headline is Critical IDF Surveillance Video from Hamas's Attack on October the 7th Missing. Subheading, critical recordings from October the 7th had been removed from the central database. The IDF's official statement on this issue is that the videos were restricted to authorized personnel. The article continues to state that this is suspicious, and many people believe that it's being done to hide the evidence. What evidence would that be? Well, if this attack was facilitated, then of course the footage would show you indications of that for any seasoned forensic examiner. Now, remember the fact, Usman, that at the time, the video of Efrat Fenixon was focusing on a specific claim. And that is, why did it take the Israeli IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, nearly 7 hours to respond to these attacks on the Gaza border, considering that this is one of the most terrorism-prepared countries on the planet? In fact, when Western police forces want to learn about things such as crowd control and response to so-called lone wolf terrorism, it's the Israelis that train them. And so if the last lone wolf attack that gained headlines in the UK, and that was, let's take, for example, the one at Tower Bridge, the narwhal attack, where the whale's tooth was used by a passerby to defend themselves. That attack, if memory serves me correctly, the response time by counterterrorism police, the Met Police in London, was around 6 minutes or so. It certainly wasn't longer than 10 minutes, whatever it was. It was 4 minutes, 6 minutes. But that's been the pattern in London for a long time. The response to attacks comes in minutes. Now, Israel is a country far smaller, not just in geographical terms, but also in population terms than the UK. How on earth does it take 7 hours for the IDF to respond? And this footage from the border could have helped to provide some answers, and now it's gone missing, according to the Jerusalem Post, dated December the 3rd. And again, all these receipts will be put up on Radical Media, and you can find that via maajidnawaz.substack.com. But again, it doesn't stop there. This week brought us many Christmas gifts, Osman. Another article, very serious one, with the same theme. This time, again, in corporatist media, mind you, and this time in Reuters, alleging something that the last time we saw such allegations being made was around the time of 9/11. And that is, I'll read from the headline, Reuters, December the 4th, 2023. Israel is now investigating. Israel investigates possible trading knowledge ahead of October the 7th Hamas attack, by Stephen Shear. Reuters, in this article, makes it very clear that Israeli financial securities spiked in an incredibly unnatural way prior to the October 7th attacks, indicating prior insider knowledge and profiting from the attacks. So if you add all of this up together, one thing that is certain is somebody knew. It is very clear that somebody high up knew these attacks were coming. People who then learned from that somebody began trading financial securities and profiting from these attacks happening. Add all of that with the fact that the CCTV footage has gone missing, and as the New York Times have said, that Israel knew of Hamas's attack plan more than a year ago. And all I have left to say at this moment, Osman, is that time is vindicating. And the window between allegations that get us usually accused of being conspiracy theorists to corporatist media playing catch-up is ever shrinking. Now, consider all of that, and now let's re-watch the footage of Netanyahu, because if you remember last week's live stream, we said if Netanyahu continues his war after this ceasefire, it's going to get incredibly serious. Well, since then, of course, he has chosen to continue his war on Gaza, and this is how he chose to announce it.
סיימתי עכשיו פגישה עם מזכיר המדינה האמריקני אנטוני בלינקן. זמן קצר לאחר שמרצחים של החמאס רצחו ישראלים כאן בירושלים. ואמרתי לו, זה אותו חמאס. זה אותו חמאס שביצע את הטבח הנורא ב7 באוקטובר, אותו חמאס שמנסה לרצוח אותנו בכל מקום. ואמרתי לו, אנחנו נשבענו, אני נשבעתי, לחסל את החמאס. שום דבר לא יעצור אותנו. אנחנו נמשיך את המלחמה הזאת, עד שנשיג את שלושת היעדים, לשחרר את כל חטופינו, לחסל את החמאס עד תום, ולהבטיח שמעזה לא יחזור איום כזה לעולם.
So for those of you on the podcast, that was Prime Minister of Israel Netanyahu stating he's just finished his meeting with the Secretary of State for America, Antony Blinken. That was because the video was subtitled. That's why I'm able to tell you what it said. And that he has decided to resume his war on Gaza, and his aim is to eliminate Hamas and to make sure that they never arise again. Now, the thing here, the problem, of course, is read all of that, or listen to all of that in your case, in the context of what we've just revealed. If it was Netanyahu who facilitated these attacks so that he could do precisely what he's saying now, then the reasoning for why he's doing it, in other words, to eliminate Hamas, is incomplete. There is something else going on here, considering that he facilitated, and certainly people knew that these attacks were coming. Certain people even profited from them on the financial markets. So what is he really trying to do? Not what he's telling us he's doing, because what he's telling us he's doing is, oh, I'm trying to remove terrorism from Gaza. Yet when we go to the Hebrew press, we find out some further details that help us understand exactly what he is doing. So here is the Hebrew article from a new report that's just been released. And we're going to give you a translation of it because, of course, we can't read Hebrew. But thankfully, The Intercept has done the translation for us. Now, this is, again, December the 3rd from The Intercept, and the headline states, Netanyahu's goal for Gaza is to thin, that's a quote, thin the population to a minimum. Subheading, the White House requested billions to support refugee resettlement from Ukraine and Gaza in October. Here's a quote from this Intercept article. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has tasked his top advisor Ron Dermer, the Minister of Strategic Affairs, with designing plans to, quote, thin the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip to a minimum, according to a bombshell new report in an Israeli newspaper founded by the late Republican billionaire Sheldon Adelson. And again, here's the Hebrew that's referring to for those of you watching the live stream. And for those of you on the podcast, all of these receipts will be in Radical Media accompanying your podcast for you to read yourselves. So to thin the population of Gaza, not to eliminate Hamas, is what Netanyahu himself says is the purpose of this particular operation. In other words, thinning a population from their land by forcing them into the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt is what is known as ethnic cleansing. Netanyahu is telling us he's engaging in ethnic cleansing. Shame, therefore, shame on every single politician, every single Western pundit, and non-Western, mind you, because there's a lot of Indian pundits on this bandwagon as well, and every single lobbyist and activist who isn't only right now defending this war criminal Netanyahu's behavior, but is in fact ridiculing, mocking, and slandering those who are calling it out for what it is, and that is ethnic cleansing. Shame on all of you. History will judge you because Netanyahu, there is no excuse. Netanyahu is telling us what he's engaging in. He's engaging in thinning the population. And when you thin a population from their land, whether they are in Myanmar and are called Rohingya Muslims, whether they are in China, in the province of Xinjiang, and are called Uyghur Muslims, whether they are in any other territory, when you, Kashmir, when you thin a population from their land by forcibly replacing them or moving them by using violence perpetrated by the state, that is a war crime known as ethnic cleansing. The threshold for genocide, and if you notice I'm using the word ethnic cleansing and not genocide, is because genocide is a legal threshold. I'm legally trained, and so I'm legally cautious with the words I use. You don't have to be. If you're a political commentator, if you're a social commentator, use the words you feel are appropriate. I try and be legally accurate. And that's just because I, as I say, I have a law background. So I'll use the word ethnic cleansing. I believe it meets that threshold of ethnic cleansing. And so shame on all of those politicians, all of those pundits, and all of those lobbyists and campaigners that not only refuse to see the facts staring at them in the face, but rather blame those, like they did through COVID, like they did through the war in Ukraine and Zelensky's war, blame those who are attempting to raise the alarm bells. That's where we are right now. And of course, it came down to Britain's only Palestinian, half Palestinian at that, member of parliament, Layla Moran, to raise this and attempt to raise the alarm bells. Here's a tweet from Layla. By the way, I know Layla very well. We were in the Lib Dem leadership program together back in the days before I left the Liberal Democrats. But here she says, there are Christian Palestinians still in Gaza. I know this because I'm related to them. It seems some pundits have been going on the media suggesting this isn't true. I hope they're challenged robustly. Now, at this stage, I'd like to make it clear it's irrelevant what religion the people of Gaza are, and it shouldn't matter whether they're Muslim or Christian. But because you've got a whole bunch of Christian Zionists in America misinterpreting their religious scripture, deliberately so, their leaders, so that they can support Netanyahu's war because they believe that Armageddon won't come unless they do so, and their Messiah won't appear without first the third temple being built. It does become relevant to point out to them that Palestinians are also Christians. There are churches in lands that Palestinians occupy because Palestinians, like Hanan Ashrawi, the very well-known famous female Palestinian politician, is Christian. Hanan Ashrawi, look her up. And so, of course, well done, Layla, for attempting on Question Time and also on your social media for raising these points. Not that people are listening, but it is ethnic cleansing. And to substantiate the point that this is ethnic cleansing, we're going to go back to the New York Times. Have a look at this. Again, corporatist media finally catching up this week. It's been a barrage of headlines. And this is again from December the 4th. The New York Times reports up to 1.8 million Gazans, which is around 80% of the population. Unbelievable. 80% of the population have been forced to leave their homes since Israel began its bombardment in response to Hamas attack on October the 7th. And that number is expected to rise. In other words, it's expected to be more than 80%. If you're displacing 80% of the population of a certain land while telling us that your aim is to thin out the population, I'm sorry, there's no other way around this. That is an act of ethnic cleansing. Netanyahu is a war criminal, and all those people defending him while attacking those who are attempting to call this out are defending war crimes. Be careful. People won't forget this. People are right now incredibly upset because an entire population is being ethnically cleansed while you simp for dollars. And I'm going to come to who I mean by you in just a moment. And this isn't bullying or picking on anyone. These people are more powerful than we are, Osman. And we're going to show you some of their videos. And it's a tragedy that they think they can get away with this. But before we come to those individuals that are simping for Netanyahu's war crimes, let's go to the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, because he's become aware of the precise problem we're raising here as well. And that is the war crime of ethnic cleansing. Even U.S. politicians are playing catch up now and are beginning to raise the alarm bells. This is a figure no less senior than the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin.
Population. And if you drive them into the arms of the enemy, you replace a tactical victory with a strategic defeat. So I have repeatedly made clear to Israel's leaders that protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral responsibility and a strategic imperative.
Now, what he's making clear there is that what's the difference between a tactical victory and a strategic defeat? His point is, and this is the Secretary of Defense for the US, his point is that even if Netanyahu tactically wins the land in Gaza, in other words, because he's got airplanes, he can bomb them to smithereens, that's still a strategic defeat, even if he tactically wins, because strategic, i.e. long-term, the defeat here is you cannot, as we stated very clearly in last week's live stream, you cannot bomb your way out of an insurgency. And if you think that by bombing a population, you're doing anything other than sending their future orphaned children into the arms of the insurgency, then you're absolutely, you've lost it. But of course, we know that Netanyahu knows this. It's why we come back to the beginning. Netanyahu's not stupid, folks. He knows that you can't bomb your way out of an insurgency, but that's precisely what he wants. He wants to send the orphan children into the arms of the insurgency. Why? Or indeed, the fathers have lost their children into the arms of the insurgency. Why? Because Netanyahu needs war to stay in power, because this war is the only thing standing between him and the trials against him in Israel, because 94% of the Israeli public believe he is to blame. The only way he can avoid the wrath of his own public is to keep this war going for as long as possible and achieve some aims that he said he wants to achieve. One of those, clearly, as we've just shown you, is to thin the population of Gaza so that he can take over Gaza for himself. Now, we mentioned earlier, considering these are war crimes that are being perpetrated right before our very eyes, we mentioned that those who think they can get away with supporting Netanyahu are deluded. Well, we said we'd come to who they are. Well, one of them has been Elon Musk. Again, last week's live stream we mentioned clearly through his visit in Israel, in Tel Aviv, to see Netanyahu. he basically signed up to Netanyahu's strategy wholeheartedly. If you remember last week, Musk went to visit him and pretty much endorsed everything Netanyahu has said are his aims for this particular assault. Now, beyond that, and we're going to come to a clip again to remind you of what Netanyahu and Musk discussed, but we also know that others arose that were doing the bidding of Netanyahu in other countries. We're going to show you very quickly again. This is this man, Argentina's newly elected president-elect, Milei. Have a look at this. And that's him raising the Israeli flag in Argentina. The reason we're showing you that is because Musk himself has recently, to his millions of followers on his own platform, been celebrating this man. So when we said to you that by their actions, by their deeds you shall know them, that in the coming days the warmongers will make themselves clear. Again, this is from a previous Radical Media article. I'll read the quote for everybody. After these 4 days of pause expire, war hawks will not be able to hide. They need war to continue. Their very survival depends on it. By their actions you should judge them, and by their deeds you shall know them. And we stated very clearly, it was our view that Musk is one of these people. Well, have a look. This is Musk endorsing this man, Milei, in Argentina. And Javier Milei is responding, we need to talk, Elon. So that's what's going on. We stated last week that Musk had gone into the Netanyahu camp, and we stated that Javier Milei was already in the Netanyahu camp. Now, 2 people in the Netanyahu camp have decided to get together and work together in the Netanyahu camp. And it gets sadly even more depressing. But some of the heroes that people figured were the new anti-establishment saviors of free speech online are nothing, it appears, other than controlled opposition. But before we get to the next example, here is a video of Musk doing exactly what we said he was going to do, and that is side with all of Netanyahu's talking points. Keep in mind what you're about to hear. It is, on the face of it, not problematic. Musk is asking for Hamas to release the hostages. But of course, we know that there are hostages, captives on both sides. Has anyone ever wondered, as Musk should have, how it was that Israel was able to release child captives that it held in return for the hostages that Hamas held? And then ask the question, hold on a minute, what was Israel doing holding children in its jails in the first place? And that's the problem with what we're about to show you. By only focusing on one side's hostages, the Israeli hostages held by Hamas, Musk is ignoring the fact that for many, many, many years, Israel has had a policy of imprisoning children that throw stones at their soldiers in occupied lands and keeping them in their jails. And then, of course, what happens in Israeli jails is well known. So the second point in this video of Musk adopting Netanyahu's talking points after his return from Tel Aviv is his attempt to conflate pro-Palestine protests in the West as being pro-Hamas protests. Have a look at this.
Do you see this thing? Mm-hmm. Do you know what it is?
Why don't you tell everybody?
This says bring them home. The hostages. It was given to me by the parents of one of the hostages. And I said I would wear it as long as there was a hostage still remaining. And I have. The Jewish people have been persecuted for thousands of years. Everyone here has seen the massive demonstrations for Hamas in every major city in the West. That should be jarring.
So those are the 2 points. That yes, it's bad that there are hostages taken, but you've got to keep in mind that there are children in Israeli jails. And so if you're going to raise that subject, raise it properly. Condemn the fact that there are children in Israeli jails and there are female and children hostages being held by Hamas. Be fair. Don't only feel the pain of one side, because then don't blame others if you do so for accusing you of not being fair, and instead taking sides. And another person who has been an incredible letdown for many, though others have seen this coming, has been Tulsi Gabbard, who recently went on to Greg Gutfeld's show on Fox. Now, again, I've met both of these people. I've been on Greg's show and I've met Tulsi. It's an incredible disappointment what Tulsi's done. She's decided that because this recent Palestine conflict has, and you may have seen this on Instagram, Osman, has led to many, especially female progressive women in the West wanting to become Muslim, or at least wanting to explore Islam. Tulsi Gabbard has decided somehow, and Tulsi, for those of you who don't know, is a former Democratic Party politician. She's still a congresswoman, but she left the Democratic Party and is now running as an independent and aspires to be Trump's vice president. And so that's why it's significant that she's taken this stance. You can see who she's pandering to. But the idea that Western progressive women becoming interested in Islam off the back of this conflict, there is nothing inherently problematic with anybody exploring a faith tradition that has been the strongest, the front line of defense against the woke madness that you saw in the last 2 to 3 years that is running rampant in the West. And yet, this is what Tulsi Gabbard had to say about that. She took specific issue with Islam itself, not even extremism. As you hear in the video, Tulsi Gabbard, off the back of this Israel-Gaza conflict, has decided to take specific issue with Islam itself, and that is incredibly sad.
Tulsi, welcome back. Am I being too pessimistic? Are you optimistic?
Not quite.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be in the positive spirit here, in the spirit of Thanksgiving, to be grateful for all that we have. Mm-hmm. But I think your opening was very clear-eyed. I think what's interesting here with all of these American women now converting to become Muslim, it's kind of the latest iteration of, well, how do I get that, rebel, super so-called progressive street cred immediately? Especially if they're white, they can't become black. People have tried that before and failed.
Yeah,
it's coming. So for them to go and say, okay, well, now I'm going to be a Muslim, then they get rid of all of their white guilt immediately. They get rid of all that white privilege that they were born with, the things that they're struggling with, trying to deal with, and immediately become those revolutionaries that they seem to be seeking. But at the same time, as you pointed out, Dana, not really seeming to understand at all what it is they are claiming to become, nor the terrorist, radical Islamist ideology that terrorist groups like Hamas espouse and are trying to spread.
Did you catch that? So the problem is they don't understand what they're converting to, and they think Islam is going to give them street cred, and they don't really understand it, and then conflates converting to Islam with Hamas. It was a disgusting thing to do. I told Tulsi that online. I directly tagged her and told her, and this is what I said, and you can, I'll read it for everybody. Anti-Muslim U.S. military PSYOP soldier, psychological operations soldier. I'm going to come to the receipts for that in a moment. Former Democratic Congresswoman and Netanyahu wing Zionist mouthpiece, tag Tulsi Gabbard, makes it clear that she has a specific problem with Islam and singles out female conversions. Sad to see you sell yourself, Miss Gabbard. When I've put here a former U.S. military psychological operations soldier, if you go to Tulsi Gabbard's career as listed publicly on her Wikipedia page, her unit is listed there, and you can see it highlighted. United States Army Civil Affairs and Psychological Operations Command. Oh, interesting, right? United States Army Reserve. Her Battles War section, Iraq War. Tulsi Gabbard served in Iraq for Psychological Operations Command and is now on Fox News with Greg Gutfeld, somebody else who I know, stating that she's got a specific problem with Islam in the context of the Gaza Netanyahu war. And it's a very sad thing to see in the context, because Osman, you'll remember a couple of weeks ago, another mutual acquaintance of ours, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, decided to convert from Sam Harris brand, Richard Dawkins brand atheism to Christianity. Now that's celebrated. That received a lot of pundits were celebrating and saying how brave it was for her to decide to embrace Christianity in the context of, and her reasons were rather strange. It was all political reasoning that she gave in her article for why she embraced Christianity. Unheard, celebrated it. Freddie Sayers gave her an interview. But here we see Tulsi Gabbard taking specific objection, finding specific problems with those women who are becoming interested in Islam. So this is the context. Why is that relevant? Because keep in mind what we've been saying. The aim has been to try and incite what we call fifth generation warfare, i.e. a war of perception in Western societies, a civil war, an internal civil war between Muslims and the rest over how to view events unfolding around the world. This is, as we've worded it before, this was my response to Donald Trump Jr., who was picking up on something I said online. And I said, global asymmetric fifth generation hybrid civil war is the aim. Provoking World War III ushers in the total surveillance state under the guise of an emergency, as warned by Orwell, Huxley, and others, and as forecasted on my episode with Joe Rogan in January 2022. See the second hour and a half if you want to avoid my backstory to that point. What we're forecasting and have been since Jan 2022, throughout COVID and since then, is that the purpose of all of this, in particular the rise in anti-Muslim rhetoric, such as what you just saw from Tulsi Gabbard, is to turn the West against its Muslim populations so that you can drive a wedge between Western Muslims and the rest in the West. And what does that wedge serve? Well, it's obvious because, first of all, it hemorrhages support for the Palestinian people so that they can't get their state, and instead demands support for Netanyahu's ethnic cleansing and war crimes. You can already see that playing out in the media. But the most important thing it does is, through the instability, such as the riots in Ireland we recently saw, what it allows is for the state to then bring in incrementally harsher and harsher legislation to control its opposition. So after those riots in Ireland, you saw the Irish state bring in hate speech laws to police content online. That's the context. They want conflict. Netanyahu wants war. Now, I said I'm going to come back to the Musk and Netanyahu conversation. So in the context of Netanyahu wanting war, we said in last week's live stream to keep an eye out, because Netanyahu made it very clear when he spoke to Musk in his Twitter Spaces event that if he doesn't receive the support for his war crimes that he's demanding, that the West will see terrorist attacks in the West. And remember last week, Usman, we said Hamas in their entire history has never subscribed to the globalist jihadist view that Ayman al-Zawahiri and Al-Qaeda subscribe to, known in jihadist theory as the attacking Adu al-Ba'id, or the far enemy. In other words, taking the jihadism globally and attacking enemies all over the world. Hamas has never been that. Hamas has always been a nationalist jihadi group. They've only ever really focused on their interests against Israel. And even in their attacks, you don't see Hamas attacking in London English or British civilians and claiming that's a jihad in their entire history. And again, this is something this is a topic that we know, folks. All right. Hamas is not a global jihadi group. So when you hear Netanyahu say Hamas will attack everywhere, keep in mind that that is as absurd as suggesting that, for example, the Tamil Tigers are suddenly going to decide tomorrow to attack city centers in Paris and Berlin because they're upset that they lost in Sri Lanka after they were wiped out. The Tamil Tigers have never done that. Anyone who knows terrorist groups knows. Whereas if I said to you, ISIS are threatening that, Al Qaeda are threatening that, you'd understand. That's something that credibly could happen. If I said to you that Hezbollah are threatening that, you'd say, no, hang on, Hezbollah's never really attacked outside of Lebanon, or if they have, outside of Israeli targets. So keep that in mind, because those who study terrorism know this very well. Now let's re-listen to Netanyahu's conversation with Musk on Spaces, because, and I'll end after this, because it's relevant to what comes next and what I'm going to end on. But have a listen to this first.
So what do you do against an enemy of this kind? Well, the one thing you cannot do is give immunity to the terrorists because they're hiding among civilians. Because if you give them immunity, everybody says they shouldn't be doing this. But effectively, nobody's willing to take the action to make sure that this is not an effective tactic. Because if it is, it'll repeat itself again and again and again. By the way, Hamas says we're going to do it again and again. But it's not only against Israel that they'll do it. This will spread very quickly throughout the Middle East, imperil the entire region. From there, they'll go to Europe, and from there, they'll also go elsewhere to America, whom they call the Great Satan. We're just the little Satan.
Yes, America's the Great Satan.
America is the Great Satan, and this is an Iranian axis.
Yes.
It's Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas.
Yes.
It's all part of that same axis that goes against Israel, the United States, free civilization, and the moderate Arab states. We're all on one side, they're on the other side.
This is Netanyahu saying that if you don't help me effectively, Hamas is going to attack you. Now, we said last week, read that as a threat, as a direct threat, that just as October the 7th was a false flag operation, just as January the 6th was a false flag operation, Netanyahu intends to facilitate false flag operations in the West so as to blame the West for not supporting him. The aim in such an example, if that were to happen, as we tried to make very clear, is global asymmetric fifth-generation hybrid civil war. Provoking World War III ushers in the total surveillance state under the guise of an emergency. So you just heard it there. Guess what's just broken an hour before our live stream today? This is from the BBC. Oh, look, surprise, surprise, 17 minutes ago. Headline from the BBC, huge risk of Christmas attacks, warns the EU. I'm going to end it on that note, Osman. I'm going to throw it over to you.
Right there. Is this Groundhog Day again?
Exactly.
Yeah, the point is with this that what we get, the first part we're going to deal with here is coping mechanisms. Yeah. So coping mechanisms meaning that what we're seeing perceived from the point of view of, say, the left wing or really want to go down, really want to look at it from the perspective even of a civil rights point of view, from a Muslim perspective. So what I mean from that point of view is, after the global war on terror, have we got to a state of more humanization of the Muslim community, or are we still in the throes of the invented fifth column identity that was brought in? Now, the reason I say the invented fifth column identity is because pre 9/11, remember, if a Muslim was mentioned, people still used to go to Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Cat Stevens, the post 60s hippie Islam of Sufism. Yeah, the words like Wahhabism, Salafism, Islamism weren't known. The concept of jihad wasn't something that was part of the wider common vernacular. It was something was mentioned in a few movies here and there, but it wasn't part of the common vernacular. Then what we get is post 9/11, we saw a level of vilification worldwide. And when I say worldwide, yeah, I'm talking about where we think that, you know, from the Western perspective, where we're talking about the monoculture that we're part of with its different variants. So Britain, Europe, the US, and then and I include Israel within that, and using the global war on terror to make geopolitical moves. But what we've seen since then, and even with what's happened with the killing and the genocide in Gaza, is that we've had these protests with possibly millions of people around the world coming out and protesting against these genocides. But as we talked about last week, when you had Elon Musk come out, and at first looked like he's standing up to the Israeli Authority by saying, I'm going to bring in my technology so the Gazan internet access and their ability to communicate doesn't go down. So I'm going to come in as a savior for this reporting of war crimes that's happening. And then what happens then is that we already talked about the fact that subconsciously you attach yourself to this authority figure. Remember, if you understand the way that you've been programmed, which is exactly what Tulsi Gabbard understands from a PSYOPs perspective, because you get to understand how language works and how the concept of authority works. Remember, when you get left at the age of 3 now at your nursery, that's a big traumatic experience to go through. Yeah, it's actually a very, very big traumatic experience. And what it creates there is a level of compartmentalization, because before that you are part of a collective with your parents, and that's where you're given security. Now remember, with normal families nowadays, with 2 working parents and babysitters and all of that, you can talk about that level of compartmentalization coming in before that, but because the idea of the child recognizing itself as an individual around the age of 2 comes into play. But what we're talking about here is that from nursery all the way through now, you've got the idea of having to validate yourself within these different environments and the dominance hierarchies of those environments. And what dominance hierarchy means is, if you're a child in the nursery, an adult that you've never met a teacher before. It's an authority figure that moves forward and frames itself with authority. And now you're learning behavior reacting to that authority. Now remember, Maajid, from there, nursery, school, college, university. And so what we get with this is there's a response-reaction relationship, which is actually based on levels of very... See, people are going to think I'm being extreme here, but this is actually what psychologists talk about as well, that based on very subtle levels of threat, because there's ramifications to not doing something. If you're the naughty kid in nursery, you might get told to go and sit in a corner, or you might get there's some type of ramification as you go up that ladder, as your supposed maturity is recognized. There's different ramifications, but what is the ultimate ramification? Dislocation from the group, because what you're looking for is extrinsic attachment. Remember, the human being isn't hardwired for truth, it's hardwired to be socially inclusive,
to follow the herd.
Now what happens here with this now is that when Tulsi's talking about Muslims, now look at the 2 points she's made. The first point is, she said, okay, these women that are converting to Islam, she said they're going into this fashionable, street cred identity where they think they are being independent, maybe think that they're being... Well, remember the word she used, revolutionary, which is a very interesting term to use. But connecting that to actually they're not being revolutionary, we get to our other favorite word. They're being subversive. They're actually part of that 5th column. They've joined this group that is against our civilization. Yeah, so they're not...
That was the actual theme of the segment. It was the decline of Western civilization. It was in that context they were bemoaning people becoming Muslim.
And it's a very interesting point, isn't it, Maajid? When we're talking about women, we're talking about identity, we're talking about becoming independent, and we're still dealing with societies right now where black women are wearing weaves, where the expectation of a woman's presentation is infinitely higher than a man who, as our very intelligent work colleagues who have turned up with stains on their suits, Martin, and just because they're eloquent, we'll be like, okay, look, just get a wet wipe on that, and but we would never, ever have tolerated, or an office would never tolerate a female representative coming in and not being presentable. But from the other perspective, from the perspective of a male representative of that workforce, a lot is tolerated if there's a level of competency there. Yeah. So, but instead, what we're getting here is, what is it that women are finding within this intrinsic spiritual pathway? What they're finding is that you've got a level whereby, yes, it's got all of the level, it's got modesty, it's got presentation, but it's, what did we say, that it was that the male and female presentation within Islam is, it's actually more about utility from the point of view of, it's not about being objectified, it's about being able to interact within that social system without having the engagement dictated from a Freudian libido perspective. Yeah,
which, by the way, at the other side of their mouths, they're complaining of themselves when it comes to the trans agenda.
Yeah, which is, but this is the whole point with this, that we're looking at it and we see all of the moving parts. So what we'll do is we'll look at the jungle and we see all the trees, but we see the tiger, we see the deer, we see the whole jungle, and we go, okay, yeah, so what do you see? I see a jungle. But what else do you see? Okay, now which element do you want me to break down? Plant, predator, apex. The apex predator there. Do you want me to talk about what plants are there? What the ecosystem is like? What we talk about, because we see it as a whole and we see it in its moving parts, which is what critical thinking is. You see the system, then you go analytical. What they do is they keep you analytical, meaning looking at one subject. And at the same time, because your only access is from a perspective of general knowledge, yeah, remember, your only access is from a perspective of the low-hanging fruit that they're serving you. You think all the fruit comes pre-packed with maggots. Now, if I came to you and said, no, here's some fresh fruit, you go, where's the maggots? No. Fresh fruit doesn't have maggots. Yeah. So each point of knowledge that you get presented to you is separate from the entire system. And you see, and the problem is, because each good that you're getting is already dead. You haven't seen it in its connection to actual life. Now, what I mean by this is that with Tulsi Gabbard speaking the way she's speaking, anyone watching this, because you have to remember, I'm becoming informed. How? By watching this. Oh my God.
Yeah.
By what? So I'm an informed individual. From what? From watching Tulsi Gabbard. So you've literally gone to, well, we called it the low-hanging fruit, but we're talking about the fruit that's already fallen. Yep. The problem is with this that there's ramifications to this type of language. The issue with this is that we're not talking about we can use the word minorities, but these are sizable minorities within these countries, but also you're talking about people outside of those minorities, because now we're in this fourth industrial revolution. Someone in Dubai is watching that, someone in Pakistan is watching that. And what we get with this is we get this aspect of, we do not recognize your humanity and your identity, and unless you adjust to how we want you to be, you're devalued. Now, this straight away connects to the points that we were making earlier about the clearing of Gaza.
The thinning of the population.
The thinning of the population, the ethnic cleansing, because we know that for the last 50 years, there's been a lot of events from the point of view of Israel and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, but nothing that's been so well known. Previous to this, I think the closest thing to this would have been the Sabra and Shatila massacre. Yeah. But the point is with that even with that, Israel gets to see, you see, that was an exercise in how far can you push it before you get a backlash. Yeah. And they pushed it, and there was really no ramifications from the Sabra and Shatila massacre. And what we're seeing with Gaza right now is that, yes, the envelope's being pushed, but is there ramifications? That's the question. Is there going to be ramifications?
Well, I'm beginning to wonder whether Erdogan is just full of hot air.
The point is with this, Maajid, where it comes into with this is Erdogan might be speaking the way he's speaking, but when you look at the entire system, once again, we get to the system question with this. We're not talking about, is there will there to do something? We're talking about, is there, what is the something that you want to do? Because the problem we always get to with this is that when we look at geopolitics, it comes down to pragmatism, doesn't it? You're not going to be able to just go, okay, we're going to go and fight them, because all the way through history, any real student of geopolitics, and we're not talking about guys that want to get on the internet and start putting across, I don't know, concepts like Khilafat, for example, Maajid. You see, I'm not meant. Yeah, you might get people,
upstart podcasters who think they have some great insight into world affairs.
You might get someone thinking that there's a be all and end all, not understanding that. Well, actually, start looking at history, and you're going to see that you're even going to see sultans, or and we're not talking about the Ottoman Empire here. We're talking about pre the Ottoman Empire, during the whole aspect of the Crusades, and we're talking that you saw a lot of very complicated geopolitical movement happening. Yeah, and we're talking about between Christian states, Muslim states, then Christian states, Muslim states going against other Muslim states. And once you start looking into it, you start saying, okay, it's seldom been clear.
Yeah.
Like that. It's seldom been this thing of us versus them. Why? Because we're talking about, ultimately, once you get groups that are trading with each other, people start to get to know each other, people get comfortable, and then you get another group. At one point you had Muslims, Crusaders, and you had Mongolian, the Turco-Mongol invasions happening. Yeah. And when we start looking at historically, even from that point of view with massacres, remember the Mongolian invasion of just Baghdad on its own was 800,000 people that were massacred in Baghdad. Yeah. So I'm not justifying anything, because from my point of view, this is absolute horror that we're seeing. Yep. But what I'm saying with this is to see what's going on and understand that if you're looking at something right now, we're looking at what's going on with Gaza, and these individuals such as Benjamin Netanyahu, Elon Musk, and I dare say others in the Middle East, know that reality is like a roller coaster. That right now, while we're going through the twisty-turny bit, the people are complaining, but now we've got the ladder up coming soon. So what I mean by this is that the next geopolitical move that's going to be made will once again be a fast move with ramifications. Yep. So let me give you an example of this. If we wanted to be shoddy with it, we could say, oh, there's been, and this is actually true, that there's been some outbreak of child sickness in China recently, hasn't there? Yep. And people have been saying, oh, is this the next pandemic that's coming? And there's, I think there's children with oxygen tanks in, and they're sitting there in prams. It's quite a visual that's going around with it. Now, let's just say that after this, if all of a sudden we had the whispers of another pandemic, how very quickly the plight of the Palestinian is forgotten. And even that word, Palestinian, minimizes.
As quickly as the plight of the Ukrainian has been forgotten.
Yeah. But this is the thing with this, Maajid, that people accept it and they go with this, but that's just the way things are. And my point with this is that with the whole COVID situation, with all the evidence that came out, there's been no real ramifications. And to the point where friends of mine who I've got a hell of a lot of respect for, Maajid, are saying to me, yeah, one of them who I've got a hell of a lot of respect for, he just got another vaccination. I was like, okay, yeah. I think it might even be like a fifth vaccination, Maajid. Yeah.
By the way, while the COVID inquiry there's going to be a whitewash, but nevertheless exposed like Cummings' testimony in there, Matt Hancock's abysmal testimony. I mean, that in itself, you can see it in Parliament. They're speaking about it. And in itself, it puts you off taking any boosters. And it's as if these people aren't even awake.
But this is the point, Maajid, because people are informed by, that's the one stop.
Yep, authority.
That program there, that clip was the one stop. And the issue that then happens is, if that's your one stop and we're dealing with echo chambers. So how do we do that? How do we demonstrate this? I'm trying to say, okay, so if you've got this cup, yeah, and if these are echo chambers, but even within your echo chambers, you've got your low hanging fruit, Maajid. We're in a very dismal place, because then what we get to do is we get to, if you're sitting outside of this from a PSYOPs perspective, we get to do reciprocal radicalizing, and all we need is enough funding to do it, which we've bloody seen.
Yeah.
You know, when we're at dinner with a guy and he's saying to us, yes, I think Islam will rescue the world and and then in the next couple of months, he's there on television getting arrested.
Yeah.
And then you've got him serving the underclass, the working class. And then you've got the other guy over there in Israel with a flak jacket on, going, oh my God, missiles are coming. And you're like, don't make me laugh. You're not even really, where are you?
It's theatre.
And it's absolutely ridiculous because when you speak to real journalists, they're afraid to even say anything. And you know, Maajid, that we've got friends of ours who are journalists who have had to step away from stories, and I've noticed over the years that, and I think that also comes from a level of there's journalistic integrity even within that, because they know that bringing the story out would be irresponsible, that there wouldn't be nothing would happen from it, so they won't do it because they're actually functioning from a point of view of something happening. Once again, we get back to this point of, if you want to be informed, you have to go and inform yourself. And part of informing yourself is to understand something. To understand something means that how it stands, you understand the foundation of how this thing has been built. Yeah, it's still one of the only words that, from a semantics perspective, survives within the structuralism. Do you see what I mean? That right now, yeah, because you could actually dismantle what is a woman from the word understanding what is a woman. Yeah, what is the foundation of that word woman? Oh, it's a female human being. Yeah, that's the understand of what is a woman. Yep. That takes us back to the point that we just looked at, or the points that we're trying to make here, which are that we're watching this thing, that everyone's watching this thing, and the statements that Tulsi Gabbard's making, the statements that Benjamin Netanyahu's making, the emotional, the award-winning acting of Elon Musk with, oh my, yeah, it's fine. Okay, well, what happened to the dead? What's happened to the 10,000 dead children? Because the problem with this now is that the excuses have been stripped away. And the reason the excuses have been stripped away is because these aren't the sand jigs with the rags on their head going, oh, these aren't those. These are people like you that are reporting in clear English. And in fact, they're using when they speak and they're getting emotional, they're using the same inflections that you use. So you can't make the excuse that, oh, sorry, I don't understand you, unless you just mechanize that voice in front of you. And then the problem then occurs that at least we should have a level of righteous indignation from the people committing it, but there's a level of justification, because the logic of saying,
and demonization of those who are trying to speak out.
Yeah, and demonization of those that are trying to speak out. The logic margin of, yes, let's use this example. 2 people get killed. 2 people get killed. That's horrific. Yep. 2 people get killed. That's horrific. Yep. But then you come to me and you say, okay, we've killed 4 people. Are they the ones that did the killing? No. Okay, that's horrific. Let's stop. Obviously, what we're doing doesn't work. Yep. Because you've just committed the exact same crime. No, it isn't the same crime, because these people over here live next to the people that perpetrated it. Or this absolutely ridiculous excuse of they're human shields and they should get out from where they are. And you're watching this and you're saying, okay, these aren't liberal. These aren't the liberal democratic values or the shared values that have been pitched to us that we've signed up to within that consensus agreement with our government.
Yeah.
In fact, these are exactly the totalitarian, fascist, the totalitarian fascist methodology that we fought against during the World War. That's exactly the Nazi. The whole point of Nazism was this idea of one form of human being above another, and the elimination of the other to get rid of a problem. The problem with this mindset is, who are you going to kill? You're going to end up killing everyone until just you are standing there. And the issue with this stuff is that, and I hate saying it like this, but there's a lot of rich cultural groups, the passive people, that this generation was passive, that generation was passive, and now you've got teenagers that are growing up without anyone around them who are walking around in a state of vengeance. And yeah, one of the points that was made with this October 7th attack was, all you would have really had to do was like open the gate, and you would have had people running through there with baseball bats, because
I think to a certain extent, some of that happened. To be honest.
That's what they're saying.
Yeah, some of the people that came through once the breach was made weren't actually, it appears to me to be, weren't actually with the actual militia of Hamas.
Yeah, and they're saying those are the ones that actually committed
the atrocities.
Because you had this, you had that level of just pure rage. And remember, guys, we're not validating this. We're the ones, when Maajid said about ISIS people are the ones trying to kill people on this continent, on this island, I've had ISIS people try to kill me. Yeah. I used to walk around, well, I still do, but it's not on right now. But you know,
anyway,
the necklace from Sheikh with all victory belongs to Allah.
Yeah.
The whole point being,
it's about your other necklace, was why I said anyway.
No, I'm not talking about that one. But the point being, though,
it was like, what? What's he talking about?
No, that one. The point being that the idea is that the thread's already cut. So this idea that you can't, either sleeping or walking, you don't extend your life. So don't be afraid. But the point I'm making with this is that, and I know we always rattle on about it, because, guys, we're not picking up the maggot fruit. We're not even going to the fruit. We're going to the root. We're looking at the roots of the problem and trying to problem solve with this. And what we're seeing right now is, and really, Margie, what we're seeing here is people that should know better.
On that note, so this episode, for example, with the receipts we've presented, there are people in our own close circles that are currently very confused about this topic. Yeah. And you see that no matter the level of receipts that are presented to demonstrate there is something very wrong with the October the 7th narrative. But when people aren't thinking with a calm head on, but rather when they are impulsively reacting from anger, insult, whatever it is. And it's interesting because then the narrative confirms multiple confirmation biases about the group being spoken of, in this case, Muslims in the West.
Yeah.
Which is why what Tulsi Gabbard just did is incredibly unhelpful.
What Tulsi Gabbard just did, what we saw with Stuart Seldowitz, Yep. And the fact that
Remind everyone, in case they've forgotten that name.
Stuart Seldowitz was the one who went up to the poor Egyptian immigrant kid who's 24 years old,
Street vendor,
and went up to him and just started abusing him.
a former Obama administration national security advisor to President Obama, and he was threatening to deport him to Egypt and have him tortured through what's known as extraordinary rendition. Those of us who survived the war on terror know exactly what he's talking about, and said he was going to have him tortured and have his father have his fingernails removed by the Egyptian foreign intelligence known as the Mukhabarat. He's been arrested.
Who are known for, well, Maajid, you know about those dudes, don't you? So they,
I mean, bro, it's not, it's, you know, what you're talking about, I'll get angry.
Yeah, no, this is what I'm saying to you.
We had 17-year-old.
I think you need to put that across, Maajid, because this isn't like
17-year-old children raped in front of their parents to force the parents to confess.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the tip of the iceberg.
And this is the point is with this, that was this guy, this Stuart Seldowitz, when he's doing this, yeah, you don't even know. Yeah, the worst thing with it is, Maajid, that you don't even put it past these guys to do something irresponsible when you've got that type of hate. Yeah. And the problem is with this, that what we're seeing here is these are the same, because yeah, it's New York, Maajid. How many different groups have we trained up there? Literally trained in New York. And this is exactly what I was thinking. When I saw him doing what he was doing, I was looking and said, oh, that's New York.
New York counter-terrorism police leadership. Right to the very top.
Yeah.
Head of New York's counter-terrorism, down to their, now I include within this ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, FBI, Homeland Security, DOJ, prisons, all the way up to heads of state, as you know, Usman. And, you know, it's unbelievable that in particular with the work we've done, that Egypt was mentioned by this character.
See, people they don't understand that, and this is the point I was making just before this with Tulsi Gabbard, with Stuart Seldowitz, that when you're seeing this level of irresponsibility, because when you have a position, remember Maajid, how many times over the last 10 years, I always say, okay, don't worry, I think before I push that button, that send button.
Yeah.
That anything that's, even if I'm looking at a post and thinking I disagree with this, and I'm thinking, yeah, you know what, I'm gonna have to wait until we see this person, because there's no way to write this out for them to remember. We talked about this, didn't we, Maajid? That
correct.
How many times there's a need to say something, but you're going to have to wait until that person's in front of you.
Yeah.
Yep. But we're not even talking about need here. We're talking about prejudice, because the problem that happens is that if you're responsible for a certain demographic, if within the region that you take care of, there's a certain minority, you need to know about that minority. You need to know what are the cultural sensitivities there. Yeah. Instead, what ends up happening is that, yeah, Muslim Americans are infinitely more. I don't use the word even integrated. I use the word assimilated, because they're infinitely more assimilated than you'd even have here in Britain, for example. Yeah. So when I went over to the US, and some of our Muslim colleagues were, oh, Bismillah, and I was like, no, I can't eat that. It's not halal. Yeah, it's not. So we're quite strict and conservative in the way.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say conservative. It's just a case of I actually look at it. Yeah, we look at it from the point of view of the stricter we are on ourselves, the more freedom we give ourselves. It actually makes things a lot simpler.
Yeah.
It makes things a lot simpler to restrict. But the point is, what you saw was that there wasn't that these guys were American Muslims. They were very much American. Yeah, and even from a perspective of the communities that are there aren't really insular by our understanding of what an insular community would be. Even if we went to Dearborn, Michigan, those are still open American communities. They're not insular by a UK level of what.
Tell them to
insular
come
would
see
be.
Dewsbury.
But
I said,
yeah, a UK level of
come
insular,
see Dewsbury.
Maajid, is
Yeah, different level.
yeah, one of our boys that we had dinner with before he went over to actually I'm not even going to say where he went over to because it's giving too many clues, but actually I will know when he went over to Malaysia. Yeah, and I was asking why his wife had a certain accent, even though she'd been brought up in the UK, and Zubair had to explain to me that within the insular community, sometimes they don't even need to speak English.
Correct.
And I was like, no.
Their daily lives.
Yeah, in their daily lives, they don't need to speak English. So they're literally speaking with English as their second language.
Yep.
And thinking in, what would it be called?
You don't like realize how unique it is that you're my age growing up, right? Most other Muslims that you'd meet wouldn't speak like you do or like I do. They would speak with a twang because English was their second language, because they were born to migrant parents who did not speak English at all. And so they were speaking in their mother tongue with their family, friends, and parents, and then would learn English at school as a second language.
Yeah, and this
communities were very insular.
Yeah, and this is funny, Martin, because exactly what you just said there is what I was speaking to Khadija about yesterday when I said, look, what is it with these guys with they're educated guys with PhDs, and he's just said narcissist to me.
Yeah, because he's learned it by reading, not by speaking.
Yeah. He's read it. He's never narcissist, and I'm like, this guy's got. But the point being that the when we're talking about integration here, what Tulsi's not talking about communities that are so different to her. Dave Chappelle is an American Muslim. Mike Tyson is an American Muslim. And when she's talking, the Somalian, what's her name? I can't remember, the politician, the one that.
Oh yes, Ilhan Omar.
Yeah. She's an American. She's an American politician.
Rashida Tlaib, the Palestinian one, as well, in Congress.
So it's not as if they're short of representation, but so when you get this level of vilification going on, it's pushing a button. The same way the claims about Obama being Muslim were weaponized, and that fact on its own shows that there's a perception of the Muslim as the other.
Yeah.
And that's very dangerous when we're talking about a bloc. So yeah, when we had the Cold War going on, the idea of the communist bloc. Yeah. So when we look at what's going on right now, we're looking at a bloc, and that bloc, if we use Daily Wire language, has taken on the Judeo-Christian bloc versus the empowered Judeo-Christian bloc, which
is historically a fallacy.
Yeah,
in the first
historically, the Holocaust was a European issue. The pogroms that happened in Europe. The Ottoman Empire had
Well, yeah.
Jewish ministers.
In 1492, after, and a lot of people don't actually process this when we say it. It's incredibly, it's fascinating when you think about it. 900 years Spain had Moorish, Arab, Muslim rulers. 900 years is a long, bloody time for Muslim presence in Europe. It was a golden era civilization that is universally recognized by historians. Jews were integrated in Arab Andalusian Spain scientifically, philosophically. And then the Inquisition happened in 1492. You've mentioned the Jews in Turkey, because that's where they went. Once the Inquisition happened and Muslims and Jews were brutally removed from Spain, and of course we see the result now. You've got Spanish, if you go to Spain, it's Arab architecture, Arab names, Arab remnants in their language, but very few Muslims unless they're recently arrived migrants. When that Inquisition happened to get rid of them all, the Muslims and Jews went to Ottoman Turkey, to the Ottoman state. The Jews found sanctuary in Salonika. So it's the inversion of history to say that it was the Judean Christian civilization. It's an inversion of what actually happened.
And this is the whole point of this, Maajid. What we're getting is a reconstruction of so there's a concept called cultural framing. Yeah. So you know who you are from where you've come from. Yeah. Cultural frame. So the point of cultural framing is it also takes into account generational trauma. So this is actually recognized in the Western idea of genetic inheritance. Yeah, so the idea that if you're coming from a certain background, if you've come from a working class family, then your travel upwards socially is going to be blocked from a certain point of view, even from a point of view of your competency. Yeah, it's something that's there within the methodology of capitalism. So communism relies upon something else, which is called blank slate theory, which means if you clean off a couple of generations, you can re-educate the generation underneath. Yeah. Now, it's interesting because once you start restructuring history, you also start reframing cultural background. Now, this is the funny thing with this, isn't it? Because what are we doing when we're sitting there having these conversations with people? Yeah, the one-on-one, or when we're sitting there having conversations with individuals and we're explaining to them about Richard Francis Burton and how the reason he got the funding to go over to Mecca, Medina, was because he wanted to do his pilgrimage. Yeah. And he got the funding so he could go and map the forbidden cities, but he was a practicing Qadri Muslim, and on his death, his wife burned all his writings. Yes, they wouldn't. So whatever he'd written, because enlightenment he gained.
Qadris and other Sufi Tasawwuf movements believe in knowledge being experiential and not learned from dead books. And she was probably worried about his books being misinterpreted, right?
Yeah, or probably more from the point of view that not being misinterpreted, but actually interpreted the way they've been written. Because I think what we get with this is we get a lot of this fear of being ostracized, because obviously Richard Francis Burton, being known as the greatest British adventurer, whatever he'd written would have been taken very seriously. And we know that whatever he would have written would have been in line with what we talk about.
Yeah.
Because that is the Qadriya Tariqa, but it would have it would have been interesting, but what we once again, I like to think it would have been akin to what Sheikh Abdul Wahid Renegan, on the founder of traditionalism, talked about. But
Dugin's teacher.
Dugin's teacher,
in tradition.
Steve Bannon's teacher, the one who, in fact, the fact that the Judeo-Christian symbolism movement is once again hijacking or appropriating the teachings. The founder of traditionalism was a Muslim sheikh. Sheikh Abdul Wahid. Rene Guénon was a traditionalist. He was a Sufi Muslim who died as a Sufi Muslim in Egypt.
Yeah, this explains, again, just to repeat this, some people are listening to the podcast for the first time on the live stream. This explains Putin's rapprochement with the Chechens, who are inherently a traditionalist Sufi community. Of course, the wars, as happened in Bosnia, led to Wahhabism penetrating those societies because Saudi funding, same with Bosnia, they were originally Ottoman aligned, and the Ottomans were traditionalist Sufi in creed. So the same thing as with the Chechens. And this explains how Putin got out of his internal war with the Chechens by realigning and providing space for that traditionalism. And it's that same traditionalism that Putin then adopted for the rest, for his view, for the rest of how he wanted Russia to be as well. And this is Dugin. This is Dugin's philosophy. Where does Dugin get it from? Rene Guénon. And as you've just stated, Guénon was a Sufi traditionalist who died in Egypt, a Muslim. He migrated to Egypt because he wanted to live the rest of his days in a Muslim majority context. So why are we going through all this again? Just to circle it back because we're out of time. Because Tulsi Gabbard's attempt to repeat the Seldowich intervention in media to demonize Muslim presence in the West, it betrays all of this. And so then one must seek, what is the agenda? Why is this being done? Well, divide and conquer. And then for the purposes of bringing in the technocracy is what explains this. Because if you really had the interests of society at heart, you'd recognize that the front line of defense against the deconstruction of Western societies to a point where the atomization of the West and the dissolution of our communities has reached breaking point. The front line of defense against that, whether it's the woke thing, trans thing, the failure of education, the breakup of families, the crime in inner cities, in the front line of the defense against all of that, among the traditionalists, you'll find at the front Muslims.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't make any sense, as you did during the trans debate, as you did during the COVID debate. Who was just, sorry, I hate doing this, right? But think about it. Who was the only national broadcaster in Britain to publicly challenge the COVID mandates? I mean, look, that didn't just come from nowhere, my critique of them. Obviously, it's informed by everything that makes the person that I am today, which includes the traditional upbringing and understanding and the recognition that even though it didn't affect me personally, that other human beings mattered. Precedents in history matter. So it's Tulsi Gabbard's intervention it's really sad actually, because people had a lot of high hopes for her, and to see her go, and a lot of people, by the way, if you go back to our early live streams, you see the same with RFK. The same things happened. We didn't endorse him, but we said, look, we're liking his stance on the COVID stuff. Again, he said one thing, like Musk, he said one thing, and it's as if a 3-line whip came out, and he's been whipped ever since on this Netanyahu topic. And I say Netanyahu on purpose because, again, just so there's no confusion, our problem isn't the average Israeli person, right? Sometimes when I say Israel, people think because of who we are and my beard and the color of our skin, we're anti-Jew. No. Come. In fact, next time, maybe I'll even bring the photos and put them up on screen. I've received community awards for challenging anti-Semitism from the Jewish communities, right? So that's why I'm just being very careful in saying Netanyahu. When Musk said something, he was whipped by Netanyahu and has towed the line ever since. When RFK said something, he was whipped by Netanyahu and has towed the line ever since. Gabbard, the same thing. This war broke out. She suddenly went rabidly pro-Netanyahu wing Zionist. And you have to wonder, what's going on here? What compromat do they have on these people? And what was Epstein really about? And why did that CCTV footage disappear, just like the border footage disappeared as well? Osman, any last words before? This is because we're over time. Any last words?
I think with this, guys, if you're watching it and you're thinking you'll get, I'm just going to say, if you're taking that shortcut and you're going literally to the gutter for that information, you take that word understand and break it down and say to yourself, if I want to know about this, I've got to go and inform myself. And that's it.
Well, don't worry, folks. I mean, at the end of the day, this may feel scary for the veil to be lifted. It's not the end of the world. It's the end of the illusion. What comes after this illusion, of course, is up to us as human beings. We are the architects of in this sense, of our destiny. Of course, the source is always there, but we are responsible for how we define our future. As we stood up during the COVID mandate period to say we cannot tolerate precedents coming in that mean that medical consent is forever abrogated. Likewise on this topic with Gaza, I genuinely think the window of so-called conspiracy theory to corporatist media revealing it is ever shrinking. I said that to you a while ago, and you see it with this Israel debate. It's become a small window from us saying something in independent media to corporatist media reporting it. Just think back to Ukraine and how long it took for them to admit that they were Nazis, the Azov battalion, right? But now you see headlines such as that New York Times headline that Israel knew Hamas attack plan more than a year ago. The window from October the 7th, we're only in December. It's only been a few months, and already we got headlines like that, or the Jerusalem Post saying that the IDF surveillance videos have disappeared from inside Israel very, very conveniently, or indeed that there is insider trading going on before the October 7 attacks, indicating a prior knowledge. So I'm, still cautiously optimistic that I think we can get through this as a species, as humans. But of course, in the short run, it means some trials and tribulations in the meanwhile. Of course, our voices being marginalized as they are, all of that is what we're going through in the short run. But I am, in the long run, optimistic. But thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back next week at the regular time, 3 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. EST for the Warrior Creed live stream, which will be provided free on Rumble. For those of you listening on the podcast, it's Radical Media. And of course, it's the premium service on Radical Media for the podcast. But the written version of all of the evidence we've presented in today's live stream is made freely available on Radical Media. And to find that, go to maajidnawaz.substack.com. And until next week, we thank you all very much for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. This service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.